Orchestrated original memoir narrative with careful name verification and genre-appropriate casting. Orchestrated original memoir narrative with careful name verification and genre-appropriate casting. The casket cost more than my car, and my sister picked it out without asking me. That's the detail I keep coming back to, even now, years later. Not the funeral itself. Not the way the minister mispronounced my father's name twice. Not even the moment they lowered him into the ground while a cold March wind cut through my coat. It's the casket. Mahogany brushed brass handles, ivory lining. $11,000. My sister chose it from a glossy catalogue at the funeral home while I sat in the parking lot of that same building shaking so hard I couldn't get the key into the ignition. Because I had just spent 4 years watching our father die and I needed 5 minutes alone before I could walk through those doors. By the time I came in, it was decided. She turned to me with her eyes already wet and said, "I knew you'd want him to have the best." And what was I supposed to say to that? That I'd wanted him to have the best for the last 1,400 days, while she was 3 states away living her life. That the best had been me, sleeping in a recliner next to his bed so I'd hear him if he choked. That the best had been the best. Money couldn't have bought, and I'd given it for free? I said nothing. I said, "It's beautiful, Bonnie." Because that was who I was back then. The one who said nothing. The one who made it easier for everybody else. Let me back up. I should tell you how I ended up there in the first place, because the casket is the end of one story and the beginning of another, and you can't understand the second without the first. My name is Della. When my father got sick, I was 31 years old and I had a life. Maybe not a glamorous one, but mine. I worked as a dental hygienist at a practice in our town, the kind of job people don't think about until they need it. I had a husband, Grant, who fixed HVAC systems and came home smelling like other people's basements, and I loved him in that worn-in way you love someone after 8 years. We had a daughter, Sloane, who was 11 then, and built entire civilizations out of her imagination on the living room floor. We had a little ranch house with a mortgage we could mostly handle if nothing went wrong. Then something went wrong. My father started forgetting things. Small things at first. He'd call me to ask how to work the remote he'd owned for 6 years. He'd leave the stove on. He drove to the grocery store one afternoon and a police officer found him 2 hours later, 3 towns over, crying in the parking lot of a Bob Evans because he couldn't remember the way home. My mother had passed 4 years before that, breast cancer, quick and merciless, and so it was just him in that house. The house I grew up in, the house Bonnie grew up in too, though she'd been gone from it longer than I had. The doctor said early onset, said it would be slow and then it would be fast, said there was no version of this where he got better. And I remember sitting in that beige consultation room with the laminated brochures about memory care facilities fanned out on the table, and I remember thinking, very clearly, the way you think a thing you can't take back, I am not going to put my father in one of those. I called Bonnie that night. She lived in Charlotte then, married to Dean, who did something in commercial real estate that I never fully understood, but that paid for a house with a 3-car garage and an outdoor kitchen they used twice a year. Bonnie was the pretty one. I'd made my peace with that decades ago. She was the one Dad lit up for, the one whose school plays he never missed, the one whose phone calls he took at the dinner table while the rest of us waited. I didn't resent it. You don't resent the sun for being warm, you just learn to stand where you stand. "Oh, Della," she said when I told her, and she cried. Real tears, I'm sure of it, because Bonnie always felt things hugely and then went back to her own life. What are we going to do? I held on to that, we like a rope. What we did, it turned out, was this. I quit my job. I moved into our father's house. Grant and Sloane stayed in our place across town, and I came home weekends when there was someone to cover, which there usually wasn't, so mostly I didn't. I learned how to give a man a sponge bath without taking his dignity. I learned the names of 7 different medications and the exact times they needed to be taken and what happened if I got them wrong. I learned to lie to him gently when he asked where my mother was, because telling him the truth meant watching him lose her all over again, fresh, every single time. Bonnie called on Sundays, she sent flowers on his birthday. Once, she flew up for a long weekend and posted photos of herself spoon-feeding him applesauce, and the caption said something about cherishing every moment. And her friends commented with little heart emojis about what a wonderful daughter she was. I scrolled past it on my phone at 2 in the morning while I waited for him to fall back asleep, and I told myself it didn't matter. Recognition wasn't why I was doing it. I was doing it because he was my father and he was disappearing, and I would not let him disappear and I would not let him disappear alone. That's the part I want you to understand. I wasn't keeping score, I genuinely wasn't. If I had been, maybe what came later wouldn't have hit me the way it did. The years did the thing the doctors said they would. Slow, and then fast. He stopped knowing the day. He stopped knowing the year. There was a stretch in the middle where he'd look at me with total clarity and say, "You're a good girl, Della, the best one." And I'd hold those words against my chest like coins. Then there was the last stretch where he didn't know me at all, where I was just the woman who showed up with the pills, and where the only mercy was that he wasn't afraid. He died on a Tuesday in March, at 4 in the morning, with his hand in mine. The hospice nurse, a kind woman named Tasha, who'd become more of a friend than half the people I'd known my whole life, told me afterward that hearing is the last thing to go, so I should keep talking to him. I told him I loved him. I told him Mom was waiting. I told him he could let go now, that I'd be okay even though I wasn't sure that was true. And then he was gone, just like that, the way a candle goes when you didn't notice anyone had opened a window. I called Bonnie at 4:15. She didn't pick up. She called back at 9 when she woke up, and she screamed into the phone, and I held it away from my ear and stared at the ceiling fan and felt nothing at all. Just the grey static of a person who has run all the way to the end of herself. She flew in the next day, and from the moment she landed, she was in charge. I want to be fair to her even now. Grief makes people strange. Maybe she needed to control the funeral because she couldn't control the loss. Maybe taking over the casket and the flowers and the catered luncheon for 60 people at the house was her way of mattering, since she hadn't been there for the part that actually mattered. I've turned it over 1,000 ways trying to be generous. But I think the truth is simpler and uglier than that. I think she walked back into that house, the house she hadn't lived in for 20 years. And she looked around at the furniture and the framed photos and the $400,000 of paid-off real estate. And somewhere underneath the grief, a calculator started running. I didn't see it at first. I was useless that week. I'd organized my entire existence around keeping one man alive, and now that he wasn't, I didn't know what to do with my hands, so I let her take over. I signed where she pointed. I nodded at the casket. I wore the black dress she said I should wear. And at the funeral, when she stood up to give the eulogy that I have not been asked to write or even review, she told a room full of our relatives a story about our father that featured her at the center of it, the devoted daughter, the one who'd given everything. And I sat in the front pew with my husband's hand on my knee, and I did not correct a single word. Afterward, an aunt I barely knew hugged me and said, "Your sister is just remarkable, the way she dropped everything." And I said, "She really is," because I was still that person, the one who made it easy. The reading of the will was 11 days later. Now here's something about America that I learned the hard way, and I'm telling you in case you ever find yourself in the cold water I found myself in. We have this idea, all of us, that there's a dramatic moment where a lawyer in a wood-paneled office opens an envelope and reads aloud who gets what, and everyone gasps. That mostly doesn't happen. What happens is paperwork. What happens is probate, which is a slow, bureaucratic, soul-grinding process where the state makes sure the dead person's debts get paid before the living people get anything. What happens is you sit across a desk from a man named Mr. Pruitt, who'd been my father's attorney for 30 years, and he slides documents toward you. And the drama is all underneath the surface, in the small print, in the things that were changed, and the things that weren't. My father, it turned out, had a will, a good one. Mr. Pruitt had drawn it up years ago before the diagnosis, back when our father still had every faculty he was born with. And in that will, the house went to me. Not to both of us. To me. There was a letter attached, in Dad's handwriting, that Mr. Pruitt read aloud in a voice that cracked a little. It said that I had given up my own life to care for him, that he knew it, that he saw it even when he couldn't say so, and that the house was the only way he had to thank me. The rest of his assets, a modest savings account and a small life insurance policy, maybe 60,000 all told, was to be split evenly between Bonnie and me. Fair. Generous even, given how lopsided the years had been. I started crying before he finished, not because of the house, because of the letter. Because my father, in a moment of clarity I never got to witness, had seen me. After a lifetime of standing where the sun didn't reach, he'd seen me, and he'd put it in writing, and now I had proof. Bonnie did not cry. Bonnie said, "When was this written?" Mr. Pruitt told her the date, 6 years before the diagnosis. So before he got sick, she said, before any of us knew what was coming. He couldn't have anticipated the burden Della took on. Burden. She said burden, like she was reading from a brochure. Circumstances changed enormously. I think it's only fair that the estate reflect the reality of what actually happened, which is that this was a family loss and a family responsibility. I stopped crying. The room got very quiet and very clear, the way the air gets right before a storm. "What are you saying?" I asked her. "I'm saying we should split everything 50-50, she said, and she said it warmly. She said it like she was being generous. She said it like she was the reasonable one and I was the one being asked to be reasonable in return. The house too, we sell it, we split it, we both move on. It's what Dad would have wanted. He'd never have wanted this to come between us." I have replayed that sentence so many times. He'd never have wanted this to come between us. As if I were the one creating a problem by simply receiving what my father had explicitly, in writing, in his own hand, given to me. I looked at Mr. Pruitt. He looked tired, like a man who had watched this exact scene play out across that desk for 30 years. He said, carefully, that the will was valid, that it had been executed properly, that I was under no legal obligation to do anything but accept what my father had left me. And Bonnie's whole face changed. I'd seen her angry before. She was my sister. But I'd never seen this. The warmth dropped off her like a mask hitting the floor, and underneath was something cold and calculating that I didn't recognize, that maybe had always been there, and I'd just never been worth showing it to. "You're really going to do this," she said, not a question. "You're going to take the entire house, after everything." After everything. I almost laughed. After everything I had done, she meant after everything she had felt. The long-distance grief, the Sunday phone calls, the applesauce photos. We left Mr. Pruitt's office not speaking, and that's where the real fight began. The one that lasted 7 months and nearly cost me my marriage, my sanity, and the last shred of the family I had left. Bonnie hired a lawyer. Of course she did. Dean's money bought her a sharp one from a firm in the city, a man who specialized in estate disputes, which I learned is a polite phrase for what happens when one family member decides the dead person got it wrong. Their argument was that our father had been showing early signs of cognitive decline even before his diagnosis, that the will reflecting his wishes might not reflect his true intent, and that I had exercised undue influence over a vulnerable man by living with him and isolating him from his other daughter. Isolating him. I read that word in a legal document and I had to set the paper down and walk into the backyard and scream into the collar of my jacket so Sloane wouldn't hear. I had not isolated him. I had answered the phone every single time Bonnie called. I had held that phone to his ear when he could no longer hold it himself. I had begged her, more than once, to come visit, to give me a weekend, even a single day, and she had always had a reason. Dean's schedule, a fundraiser, the flights were expensive, and now her lawyer was suggesting that I, the one who showed up, had somehow kept her away. Here is the part where I think most people expect me to say I stood up for myself. I didn't. Not at first. At first I wanted to give in. I called Grant into the kitchen one night after Sloane was asleep, And I told him I thought we should just settle. Split the house, sell it, give Bonnie what she wanted, make it stop. I was so tired. The grief and the fight had braided together into one rope around my throat, and I just wanted to be able to breathe. It's only money, I said. I don't want to be the kind of person who fights her sister over money while our father's barely in the ground. And my husband, who is not a man of many words, looked at me across our kitchen table for a long moment. Then he said the thing that turned everything. He said, Della, it was never about the money for you. It was never about the money for him either. He didn't leave you that house because it's worth 400 grand. He left you that house because it was the only language he had left to tell you that he saw what you did. If you give it away to make her comfortable, you're not being generous. You're telling him he was wrong. You're telling yourself you didn't deserve to be seen. I didn't sleep that night. I lay there and I thought about my father's handwriting on that letter, the way the letters got shaky toward the end of each line, because his hand was already starting to betray him even then. I thought about every night in that recliner. I thought about the time he'd looked at me with sudden, terrible clarity and asked, Am I being a burden to you, sweetheart? And I told him no, never, and meant it with everything in me. And I thought about Bonnie's lawyer using that same word, burden, to describe what I had given freely and would have given 1,000 times over. And something in me, something that had spent 30-some years standing quietly in the shade, finally turned toward the light. I called Mr. Pruitt the next morning. I told him I wanted to fight. He told me the will was strong, that he'd been a witness to my father's competence at the time of signing, that the undue influence claim was a long shot designed mainly to pressure me into settling. They're betting you won't have the stomach for it, he said. Most people don't, it's why this works. It's why this works. I thought about how many quiet daughters had sat in that chair before me and given up because fighting felt unseemly, because grief had hollowed them out, because some sister or brother with sharper elbows had counted on exactly that. I have the stomach for it, I told him, and for the first time in my life, I think I meant something all the way down. The next 7 months were brutal. I won't pretend otherwise. Bonnie's lawyer deposed me for 6 hours, asking me the same questions in different shapes, trying to get me to contradict myself, trying to paint me as a manipulator. I gave Tasha's name and the hospice agency's records and the pharmacy logs and the long, dull, beautiful paper trail of a life spent caregiving. I produced text messages, years of them, where I'd begged Bonnie to visit and she'd declined. I produced the visitor log from the brief period he'd been in a rehab facility, which showed my name dozens of times and hers exactly twice. The thing about the truth is that it's patient. It doesn't need to shout. It just sits there, accumulating, until the weight of it becomes undeniable. Bonnie called me once during all of it, late at night, drunk, I think. You always thought you were better than me, she said. The good one. The hard-working one, St. Della. And I held the phone and I felt the old reflex rise up in me. The urge to soothe her, to say no, you've got it wrong, to make it easy. And instead I said, quietly, I never thought I was better than you, Bonnie. I just thought we were on the same side. I was wrong about that. That's the only thing I was wrong about. She hung up. We didn't speak again until the mediation. It never went to a full trial. Her lawyer, faced with the mountain of evidence and the original validity of the will, advised her to settle, and her version of settling looked nothing like the 50-50 house split she'd demanded in Mr. Pruitt's office. In the end, the will stood. The house was mine. The $60,000 in cash and insurance was split as our father had directed, and Bonnie walked away with exactly what he'd left her, which was fair, which had always been fair, and which she had spent 7 months and tens of thousands of dollars in legal fees trying to overturn out of nothing but the conviction that she deserved more for having been born beautiful and beloved. I'd love to tell you I felt triumphant. I didn't. I felt the specific, exhausted emptiness of someone who has won a war she never wanted to fight. I sold the house eventually, not because Bonnie wanted me to, but because I couldn't sleep in those rooms anymore. Couldn't pass a spot where the recliner had been without hearing the machines, without smelling the antiseptic. The money from the sale paid off our mortgage and started a college fund for Sloane and gave Grant and me a cushion we'd never had in our lives. My father's last gift, doing exactly what he intended it to do, taking care of his daughter who had taken care of him. But the house wasn't really the turning, I want to be clear about that, because if you take only one thing from my whole long story, I want it to be this. The turning wasn't winning the house. The turning was the moment in my kitchen when I decided I was allowed to be seen. The turning was every small instance after that, where I stopped making myself easy for other people's comfort. It was telling my aunt the next time she gushed about Bonnie at a family gathering, "Actually, I'm the one who took care of him for 4 years. I just don't post about it." It was the look on that aunt's face when the story she'd been told quietly came apart. It was learning, at the age of 35, that being kind and being a doormat are not the same thing. That you can love your family and still refuse to let them set you on fire to keep themselves warm. People ask me, when I tell this story, whether I forgave my sister. The honest answer is complicated. I don't hate her. Hate takes a lot of fuel and I've got better things to burn it on. But I don't pretend either. We send each other birthday cards. We are polite at the rare funerals and weddings that force us into the same room. Sloane has cousins she barely knows. That's the cost, and I've made my peace with the price of the truth being a kind of distance. What I won't do ever again is shrink myself so that someone else can feel larger. I spent the first 3 decades of my life believing that the highest thing a woman could be was useful, agreeable, uncomplaining, that if I just gave enough, asked for little enough, took up small enough space, I would finally earn the love I was already breaking my back to deserve. My father, in his dying, taught me that I'd had it backward the whole time. He'd seen me, not because I made myself small, but in spite of it. He'd seen the largeness of what I gave and he tried in the only way left to him to give it back. I keep his letter in a frame now, on the wall of the house Grant and I still live in, the one we no longer owe anything on. The handwriting is shaky toward the end of every line. Sometimes I stand in front of it with my coffee in the morning before anyone else is up, and I read it again, and I let myself feel the thing I spent so long not letting myself feel. I deserve to be seen, I always did. And the day I finally believed that was the day I stopped being the woman who said nothing. The day I turned, not toward revenge, not toward bitterness, but toward myself. Toward the version of me my father saw clearly even as the rest of his world went dim. I'm 41 now. Sloane is in college studying nursing of all things, says she wants to help people the way I helped her grandfather, and every time she says it, I have to leave the room so she won't see me come apart. Grant still comes home smelling like other people's basements, and I still love him in that worn-in way more now than ever, because he's the one who looked at me across our kitchen table and refused to let me give myself away. The casket cost more than my car, and my sister picked it out without asking me. That's where this all started. But it's not where it ended. It ended with a woman standing in front of a framed letter, finally taking up exactly as much space as she'd earned. If you're out there somewhere, sitting in your own version of a cold parking lot, shaking too hard to turn the key, let me tell you the thing I wish someone had told me sooner. The people who love you don't need you to be small. And the people who need you to be small don't love you. It took me half a lifetime and the death of the only person who ever truly saw me to learn that. I'm telling you so it doesn't take you as long. For a long time I believed the kindest thing a person could do was make herself easy to live with. I thought if I just gave enough and asked for little enough, the love would eventually find its way to me on its own. Sitting next to my father's bed for 4 years taught me something different, though it took me until that lawyer's office to finally hear it. What happened with Bonnie wasn't bad luck or some cruel twist of fate. It followed a straight line, the way most things do once you stop pretending. I had spent years training the people around me to expect my silence. Every time I said, "It's beautiful, Bonnie," when I wanted to scream, every time I let her rewrite the story of who showed up, I was teaching her that my labor was free. and my dignity was optional. So when there was finally something worth taking, she reached for it without hesitation, because I had never once shown her there'd be a cost. We get back. Eventually. Exactly what we planned. I had planted my own erasure for 30 years. The thing that saved me wasn't anger. Anger is loud and it burns out fast. What saved me was the slow, clear-eyed work of looking at the facts and refusing to flinch. The pharmacy logs, the visitor records, the years of text messages where I'd begged for help and been told no. I had to think instead of just feeling, to build something solid out of the truth instead of collapsing into how much it hurt. That clarity was the only weapon I had, and it turned out to be enough. But clarity alone wouldn't have carried me through 7 months of depositions and a sister calling me drunk at midnight. That took a different kind of strength, the unglamorous kind, the kind that gets up the next morning and answers the next question, and keeps standing when standing is the hardest thing in the world. I learned that endurance isn't loud either, it's just the decision, made over and over, not to give yourself away to make someone else comfortable. And underneath all of it sat the one thing I refused to bargain with, the simple knowledge of what was right. My father saw me clearly and put it in writing, and honoring that wasn't greed, no matter how warmly Bonnie dressed up her demand. Doing the right thing and being a doormat are not the same. It took me half my life and the loss of the only person who truly saw me to understand the difference. If you're sitting in your own cold parking lot right now, shaking too hard to turn the key, hear me. The people who love you don't need you to be small. The people who need you small were never loving you at all. I learned it late. I'm telling you so it doesn't take you as long.